Alright, what's going on, Forgotten Nation? I'm your host, FG, and welcome back to another vinyl hands-on session, and part 3 of our Celeste vinyl coverage. Last we left off, we took a look at the B-sides of Celeste, which were alternate arrangements thanks to some guest composers that really did change up the sounds of the main game. For this next one, following up on the success that Celeste had, the developers wanted to make a DLC piece free of charge that would have a fitting conclusion to the overall narrative, while also offering a challenge for those that made it to that point. And rather than just being your basic run-of-the-mill DLC, there was a lot going on here, and the same can be said for the soundtrack. Rather than just doing a single track or two, Lena Raine composed an entirely new soundtrack to boot, which is exactly what we're looking at here today. Today we're going hands-on with Celeste Farewell. The Celeste Farewell single LP, originally pressed in 2019 by Ship to Shore Phone Co., numbered as their 50th official release in their catalog, made in collaboration with Fangamer. Releases free downloadable content a year after the game's original release, Farewell is a bonus chapter that can only be played to its entirety if all of the game's crystal hearts are collected. This includes the B-sides, the C-sides, and bonus hearts hidden in the main game. These hidden hearts often require solving puzzles, discovering Easter eggs, or even breaking the game to perform feats some may have never considered. This video will have some pretty major spoilers associated with the gameplay of Farewell, so if you want to see it for yourself, please tune out now. You've been warned. Farewell takes place sometime following the main game and the core, which sees Madeline's internal struggle of coming to terms with the death of Granny. Seeing Granny's bird, which appears throughout the main game, she believes Granny could still be reached, and goes beyond the mountain to chase that bird. What awaits is the greatest challenge that Celeste has to offer, and is in no way easy. Farewell's soundtrack goes back to the organic feel of the main game soundtrack, this time with an emphasis of using string instrumentals, such as the violin, while still mixing in the electronic and chiptune feeling. With 13 tracks total, it's actually surprising a single chapter has this much content, and it's just as good as the rest. The Farewell DLC was a heavily ambitious project, and that's because the developers, and by extension the composer Lena Raine, really did have a lot to follow on following the huge success that was Celeste. This was a game that was considered one of the best of the year, and was one of the best platforming games in a very long time. So there were some expectations to fill. So in the case of the DLC, not only did Lena Raine make an entirely new soundtrack to boot, and that on its own is already impressive, but it's the way she went about it that really does distinguish it from the rest of the game soundtracks. And I really do think that the reason for that is because of bringing in the guest musicians and having string instrumentals to accompany the music. When you hear it compared to what came before it, you can easily identify it as Farewell, because no tracks in the main game or the B-sides have use of these organic instruments. You hear the strings, you immediately recognize it's Farewell. And not everyone may like that. Again, it really does come down to a choice of preference. But what we have here really is distinct and unique, and it still harkens back to everything that made Celeste what it was. You still hear a glimpse of the main melody from, say, Forsaken City in moments of the game. But then you also have the melody of Farewell, not to mention that the last track in its gameplay is that main melody. The thing about Farewell, though, is the difficulty, and especially the developers knew this, having locked the rest of the game behind the gate for the Crystal Hearts. So not everyone may get to experience the Farewell soundtrack in its entirety, because some games are just too hard for some to overcome, and that's a real damn shame. So, I hate to say it, but there are some that the only way you'll really get to hear it is through media like the soundtracks. And I'm glad we have a vinyl pressing here, because this does a lot compared to the other two that really does make this my favorite out of the bunch. So, let's talk about it. Immediately with the presentation, it's worth noting that because this was done in conjunction with Fangamer, there are some liberties here that don't quite follow as opposed to the two we've seen before. And that all comes down to presentation. Immediately looking at the front artwork of the outer sleeve, you'll notice that this really does feel like a combination of both from the past. Front and center we have Madeline in the Sea of Stars, but then taking a note from the B-sides is honestly my favorite addition to this vinyl pressing. And that's that it's got this foil just like the B-sides, but the one thing that actually doesn't have foil is Madeline. Now, this might not sound like it's anything special, but listen to me here. If you take this under certain lighting conditions, you'll notice that everything falls dark except for Madeline in the foreground, who even in those situations is always lit up. Now, I might be looking into this too deeply, but that seems like a real connection between the state of mind and where she finds herself. Remember that callback to the campfire scene about her idea of depression, feeling like she's drowning in a sea? It's small throwbacks here that go a long way. There's a lot of genius to Farewell, again, but I really do like this here. This is some of my favorite art of the bunch, and this is one I actually regularly display behind me. Additionally, on the back side, not only do we have the track listing, but we also have some elements of Farewell, which includes the moon when you select the stage, as well as some background elements such as the collapsing tower, or this, I believe it's called a tardigrade. It's like a nanosophic bear. It was popular on the internet for a time. But no, it accompanies the front side and it still looks just as great. It's even got the foil, so it's shiny. Overall, I really do love the presentation of the packaging of the outer sleeve. And again, just easily one of my favorites. But now let's take a look at the inside. Rather than just the vinyl, they actually included a paper version of the artwork, both the front and the back. So if you don't like the shininess, this is still a great way to present it. And it's definitely a way to see the high quality of its artwork. The thing that I really like, though, that they didn't do in the B-sides on the back side, composition notes. You've heard me before, I love composition notes. It explains a little bit about what the creator was going through at the time. So the fact that we got some here, and it's a good amount too, I am so glad they included this. And then we also have the credits for all the musicians that helped to compose the soundtrack, including the guest musicians. To read off a couple of here, we have the violin viola, which is Michelle Nachtigal. We have the cello, which is Sung Ha Hong, and percussion, which is Doug Perry. And of course, all the rest is Lena Raine. Credit where credit's due, but the fact that it really does have the composition notes, I am so glad they included that. That's what the B-sides needed. But then last but not least, we have the vinyl. Now, if you saw the B-sides, you know what to expect. This is just a clear vinyl. And again, it always just comes down to preference and the quality of the pressing. In my case, it's actually pretty good. It's definitely better than the B-sides, and it doesn't have that scratch like that one. Thank God. Though there are a couple of pops and crackles in between. And the artwork on this one actually is two sides of the same coin. We got Madeline, and we got Battleline. The artwork of these two looks slightly different though from what we've seen from the game, as well as the artwork of these vinyls. I actually don't know if it's the same artist or if it's someone different, but it really does look distinct compared to what we've seen before of Madeline and Battleline. And the fact that we have them here on the vinyl is really cool. It's, again, the whole idea of Farewell is this idea of the inner workings of Madeline. So I feel like this was an extra addition, a great way, rather than just simply the track listing, to have here on the vinyl. Overall, I'm really impressed with this, the presentation of this one. But how's it sound? Well, here's a couple of samples from Celeste Farewell that, again, because it is a single chapter, you're going to hear some similarities in its overall design, such as the melody, which is sprinkled throughout the tracks, and again, with the instruments such as the strings. But overall, this is still one I really do enjoy. And I do think the pressing here is really good for what it is. Some variants, of course, include Fangamer's Own, which is a special splatter design that has colors based on the setting of Farewell. It's actually very similar to the album art. So there are some variants out there, so if clear's not your thing, then there's definitely some more colorful ones. But in this one, let's take a listen. Here's some samples from Celeste Farewell. The Farewell DLC really does feel like the ultimate conclusion to both the game and Madeline's journey. Though as part of that journey is the hardships that follow. For many players, because of how difficult the Farewell DLC is, they may never very well see the end of it, and the ultimate payoff of the message that Madeline experiences. And that's a real damn shame. Honestly, that's the one biggest problem with Farewell is that difficulty. Even when I was collecting footage for this video, there were times where I just had to put the controller down and walk away from the screen. And the fact that I even did make it to the end to finish this video is a real mystery. It's not the first time. I've actually done it once before on the Switch version, but that's besides the point. I really do enjoy the Farewell DLC and all the genius concepts that go into the overall design of it. And that includes the music too. But if you don't get to experience it for yourself, then you might not feel the same way in comparison. Honestly, I think the best part of the soundtrack is how it all builds up into the very end where you do hear the main version of the chapter's theme, Farewell. But unless you experience it for yourself, you might not get that same pleasure as, say, for example, if you just listen to it off of Spotify, YouTube, or however else you listen to your MP3s. Case in point, this really is something you need to experience for yourself with your own hands to really get the best opinion of. Much like the main game soundtrack, as a matter of fact. Now, where do I stand with this soundtrack and this vinyl? I really like the soundtrack. I think it has a lot to offer, and compared to the main game and the B-sides, it has more than enough to stand as its own. And the vinyl, the biggest thing I love about this is the presentation. The fact it takes the best of everything that came before it into this neat package that's made to be displayed. And overall, with a great quality pressing, even for a clear vinyl, this easily gets a recommend in my book. Though it always comes down to what you think. Not everyone may like the change in the instruments. That makes it sound pretty different from what came before it. But for those that do enjoy it, this is honestly some of the best that Celeste has to offer. And a real satisfying conclusion to its soundtrack collection. So, if you're a fan of Celeste, or you want something to add to your turntable that's just a little different but still great overall, then I would check out Celeste Farewell. And hey, if you find the color versions out there, they look just as great. And so, that's going to do it for this hands-on session of Celeste Farewell. My favorite track of the session is actually Beyond the Heart. I love how it takes what was before, which is more quiet, more building up to it. But then just becomes this action-packed romp where you really do feel like this motivation, this power of getting to where you need to go. My favorite track of the soundtrack. So I believe that actually does it. That's all the vinyls in the Celeste collection. So that's gonna end our coverage of Celeste on vinyl. For those that stuck around to the very end, thanks so much for watching.
You got mail.
Oh, what's this? Huh, that's funny. Looks like someone sent me a PowerPoint presentation. Ugh. Let's take a look. Whoa, I should have the money for, what the, wait, already? Wait, what? Wait, I didn't even give them a, how do they do it that fast?